Hi there and welcome to this video series on how to start your own Kubernetes cluster by using Terraform and kubeadm against the scaleway provider. So this is the second video out of this video series, and in the very first one I shown you how to go over this readme file and simply execute this code. So I simply grabbed this line Terraform apply, I just executed, and in like 10 minutes my Kubernetes cluster made of one master and one worker was up and running. In this video I would like to do a deep dive into the Terraform code, and I would like to just break it down to small pieces. The main file of this Terraform code is this main.tf file. By the way, for those who never heard about Terraform or for very freshmen in the Terraform, it's just infrastructure as a code, and basically if working with cloud you got two options. The very first one is to manually log in to the web interface of a particular cloud provider and provision your infrastructure by clicking. The second option is to write such kind of Terraform code. So you will have your infrastructure as a code. This main file is pretty short. It only has like 43 lines or so. And now I'm going to explain how I made it. In the beginning you have some mandatory parts. So this section Terraform tells you about what kind of Terraform version you are going to use. So I just restricted myself that I'm going to use, or this Terraform code is meant to be run with the Terraform version 0.12 and higher. Well, Terraform version, so I just want to double check that my Terraform version is in version 12. So as you can see it's 0.12.18. Well, I'm safe. And then another mandatory part of this code is the provider section. In the provider section you are specifying like what cloud provider are you willing to execute your code against. In my case I'll be executing this code against the scaleway provider, and that's why I'm saying scaleway. If this code was meant to be executed against AWS, for example, I would specify AWS. But in case of AWS, this body would look different. In case of scaleway provider, you need to specify the access key, secret key, organizational ID, then zone and the region. Type scaleway, and then Terraform, hit enter. And I think this very first link is okay. So the way how you navigate within this documentation is click on the docs and then Terraform CLI, click on the providers, I believe, and among the providers you can choose out of these many providers. So basically any cloud is supporting Terraform now, or most of the clouds. I'm searching for, or I'm looking for scaleway. I chosen my scaleway provider, and here are all the available resources you can choose from. I will make it smaller so you will see it side by side. And here is my provider scaleway, and this is pretty much the same code except of these variables. And the way I've specified the variables is through the variables.tf file. So remember the scaleway access key token, organization, zone and region. And if I'm gonna click to variables, I'll find all these variables over here. Just notice one thing, then when specifying the variable, I'm not specifying the particular value. This is the mistake, or this is done by mistake, because these values, I don't want to have these values publicly available at the GitHub, I mean the default values. I'm using this special file which is called Terraform scaleway.tf vars, and I'm versioning this sample version of this file. So my input variables for the provider scaleway are basically supplied or transferred to the main.tf file through two files. So this is the first file, Terraform scaleway tf vars. Then it goes to variables.tf over here, and finally it ends up in this variable. So you can call it in this fashion. The rest of the code is basically about provisioning some particular resources at the scaleway. So I've written three modules. The first one is about the security. The second one is about the Kubernetes master, and the last one is about Kubernetes worker. As you might notice, I've also created this modules folder over here, and if I'm gonna expand it, I have 3 subfolders in it. So each module is represented by a folder. The very first one, specified over here at this line 14, is named as the security group, and this module is loaded from this subfolder modules and security group over here. So this is the source. By the way, this keyword source is mandatory. All the other input variables within the modules are specified by me, except this source. It's the same with each module. So for example, Kubernetes master, this is the keyword, this is the fixed keyword, but enabled SG-ID and so on, I just came up with these names. I think the best way to explain and to understand this code for you would be if I'm going to comment like these modules over here, and I think I'm even going to comment these lines, so you will see how this Terraform code works. One more thing I have to do before I'm going to execute the Terraform code is to comment the outputs.tf file. So let's finalize the most upper structure of this code. It's made of the variables.tf file. I quickly went over this file. Then there is the outputs.tf file. Here are some useful output variables defined for this Terraform code. So later on, once this code is executed, I have the access to these variables. And then variables.tf file. And moreover, there is one Terraform scaleway TFRs. I've mentioned the purpose of these files before. Well, before executing the Terraform apply, I need to go to this outputs.tf file, and I simply comment all the lines, because otherwise I'd be getting some weird errors. Because my Terraform code would be expecting these outputs. It would try to retrieve the values from module, Kubernetes master. Well, let's try to run Terraform validate whether the code is valid. So run Terraform validate, hit enter, and the Terraform tells me success, there is no problem with the code. So if I'm going to run Terraform apply, I should not be getting any errors, except since I have many variables defined in this variables.tf file, since I didn't supply the extra file Terraform scaleway.tf vars, it's going to ask me line by line, variable by variable. So I'm going to Control-C this code, and let me navigate to my README file. So I'm going to quickly copy this Terraform apply file with this additional Terraform scaleway Terraform file. I'll hit enter, and Terraform tells me that apply was complete, and there's like 0 resources added, 0 changed, and 0 destroyed. And that's actually expected, because if you may recall, in the main.tf file, I only have this 3-line specification, and this is basically fulfilled because I'm using Terraform in version 0.12. So far, nothing interesting, but I just think it's a good idea to understand even these basics. So let's try to execute these lines, and this should also not do any magic, because I'm just specifying that I'll be using the provider scaleway with these access credentials, and let's try to see whether it works. So let's again try to hit Terraform apply, and again same result. Well, here is the interesting part. If I'm now going to uncomment this module, Terraform should be trying to execute something. So let's try to hit Terraform apply, and few security rules should be applied. Terraform is about to create the resource which is called security instance security group. If I want to see how this resource is specified at the Terraform, I can go to the documentation. Alright, so here is the Terraform documentation, and I can search for the security resource. I'm going to help myself by clicking at this module, because over here, or this is the place where my module for the security group is stored, and I'm searching for the exact name. Yeah, this is the instance or the resource I'm searching for, and let me try to scroll down. The way how can you read this documentation is by scrolling a bit more down, and you can see what input parameters or arguments can be supplied. Here are a few optional parameters like a name, description. On the other hand, you also have some required. If you want to know what arguments are required, you can simply Ctrl+C, Ctrl+F and hit enter, and you will see there's just one parameter required, and this is the action. On the top of that, you get some cool examples. In the beginning, they might seem sometimes complicated, especially if you want to do something like for loops. If you work with Terraform for some time, they will get very easy. In my case, I have specified the inbound default policy as the drop. So by default, I want to drop everything. And when it comes to outbound default policy, so this is related to outgoing traffic, I want to accept it. As you can see, I also specified the name and some description, which by the way could be changed from this weird string to Kubernetes, for example, or Kubernetes nodes, I would say. And over here, I got two dynamic blocks. This syntax is new and it comes with Terraform 12, and I have used this new feature to iterate over this list, which is supplied in form of the variable. If I'm gonna check which ports are allowed TCP ports, so I can click at this sample file, and allowed TCP ports is this list of the ports. So these ports are necessary when you want to allow the communication within Kubernetes. And I also have one UDP port. So that's why I got two groups of the ports. Jumping back to the documentation, I want to emphasize how can you read the inbound rule. So obviously action is accept, so you are accepting or allowing the traffic to the port 22 from the particular IP address. The second inbound rule tells you that the action again is accept for the port 80, and since there's no IP or IP range is specified, I'm assuming it's allowed for anybody. Taking advantage out of this new Terraform in version 12, I specified this dynamic block for the inbound rule, and what I do, I iterate through these allowed TCP ports, and I'm using this special syntax, this content, which starts over here and ends over here. And the action is obviously accept. The port will be supplied from this for loop. The protocol is TCP, and IP range is basically the entire internet. Well, in order to avoid repeating myself, I just use this syntax. And if you still don't get it, how it works and how this dynamic block is meant, I'm simply going to copy this line number 15 and going back to my main file. So let's try to start writing the code over here. So here is the simple list of the ports I want to allow. And if I didn't know about this dynamic syntax, most likely I will simply go to the documentation and simply do this thing, like I want to specify the inbound rule, of course within this resource, but this is just the meta code, right? So the very first port would be 30,003 ones. Yeah, okay, let's pretend that this IP address is okay. So I would simply copy and simply change these ports like this, and so on and so on. By now I believe that you got better idea what this dynamic blocks does, right? So this word inbound rule is mandatory because it will be reflected in this fashion, right? And then this is the special syntax for each. It's looping, or it is going over these TCP ports. The action is always the same. Then the port, so each time it takes and iterates over these ports. Protocol the same and IP range is the same. And now you might be wondering, like, why do I have two dynamic blocks? Just notice that this variable allowed UDP port and allowed TCP ports are different. So here is the difference, UDP and TCP, right? So if I'm going to variables or this sample file, you will see that there are two different lists. Okay, let me go back to my main file within this security group, and I need to get rid of this code. Well, getting back to my console, I can scroll down, so now you understand how the dynamic blocks works in the Terraform, and it's basically reflected in this Terraform output, and it will still work. So I'll try to hit yes, and yeah, This should be quite quick because this is gonna create just the security group. And yes, as you can see, apply complete, there is one resource created, and now I can go to my Scaleway console or web interface. Great, here I am in the console and I'm all about to click at the security groups over here. The security group I'm looking for is the security K8s microservice, which has been created like 1 minute ago. I'm going to click at this group and let's try to see at these instances. This tells me that no instance has this security group attached, and if I'm going to click at the rules, you can see all these rules have been applied by the Terraform. Alright, so it seems like my very first module security group has been successfully applied by Terraform and the security group was created. One thing which is worth to mention is that once you are specifying or you're writing your own custom module like I did, you can specify, or you have to specify this source keyword. So this is specifying the path where your module is located. So again, in my case, modules and the security groups. Okay, and then I specified 3 additional parameters. In case you don't need to specify, or if there's no necessity to specify some input arguments or variables, you don't have to, but somehow I needed to specify the security group name. Then I needed to get the TCP and UDP ports from my Terraform Scaleway TF vars file through the variables.tf file get into this security group module. And that's why I have specified these variables over here. So these 3 variables will be passed to this module. One more thing perhaps which is worth to mention is that these 3 variables which are specified for the security group module are specified in these most upper version.tf files, and that's obvious, right? So I'm going to search for these 3 variables somewhere over here. Well, this is the allowed TCP ports, allowed UDP ports, and there is one more security group, I believe. No, the security group is not present over here because it's defined directly, or the value of this variable is defined directly in here. So you got 2 options. You can either specify everything in this main.tf file, which is not really recommended, but it's gonna work, or you can get these variables through this variables.tf file. On the top of that, if it's the module, and modules are stored in the modules and security groups, well, for this particular one, you need to specify these 3 variables, or if you have like 10 variables, again, one more time in the variables.tf file within this security group module. So you can see this is just a plain specification for these 3 variables, and then you can use them in the main.tf file within the security groups module over here. So notice here is the security group name and allowed TCP ports and allowed UDP ports. So it might seem like you need to specify variables like twice, and it's totally true. It might be overwhelming in the beginning and it took me a while to get used to it. Alright, that's pretty much it. I hope you like this video, and if you like it, just drop a comment below and make sure you subscribe and hit the little bell so you don't miss any videos. I'll see you in the next one.